Hi, everybody. I'm Hayes Davis, the author of the Uncharted Territory newsletter, and today I've got Joe Petruzzi, who's joining us, and he's going to talk about the role of the GTM engineer, what it means, what it is. We really want to kind of demystify this, especially for sales leaders who, may be hearing about the role and not really sure what to make of it. So, Joe, you want to just give us a quick introduction of you and your background, and then we'll dive into the conversation.
Yeah. So Joe Petruzzi, I'm the founder of Organic Outreach. We're basically an outbound consulting company, but because of GTM engineering being so popular in the last like 2.5 years, I think we've maybe adopted that term a little bit more instead of outbound consulting because there's so much overlap. Yeah, I would say really specifically specializing in cold email deliverability, and then next to that is like the data and messaging, usually for outbound sales teams. So that's kind of what I do. I used to be a controls engineer back in the day in like 2018, 19 out of school. So I have a unique perspective that I'm actually used to solving problems without being the smartest guy in the room because I was always the junior engineer, right? So I'm used to this in the middle portion. So I think uniquely that's actually ended up how I've gotten down this path. But yeah, excited to be here, man.
Cool. All right. Well, look, let's jump right into it. And, like I said in our conversation earlier, just kind of background, I think there's a lot of folks who hear the GTM engineer term who are not really sure what exactly that means. And frankly, I've paid attention pretty closely. I'm not entirely sure I feel like I could fully define it properly. So let's start there. Like, if you were going to define the role of the GTM engineer, what would you say that the key problem space is for a GTM engineer that it's really emerged to solve for? How would you describe that?
Yeah, honestly, I think if I had to summarize it, it's really the modern way of trying to get the proper tools and automations in place to overcome low conversion rates for outbound. I think that's the best way to do it because the reality is I was in the space maybe 2018 is when I started, and there was all kinds of fun stuff happening at that time. This was pre-Clay, this was like Lemlist was just getting like really cool with like you could put images with personalization on emails. There was no deliverability problems, and you can just open up Lemlist and just do this, and you can use your your Gmail account that your team gave you as a sales rep. So there wasn't like a lot of complicated stuff going on with sales teams. But I think what happened was, cold email deliverability got really hard the last 2.5, 3 years. People started getting a lot of cold emails because it was actually cheaper to send emails. So people just started getting more of them. And then naturally reply rates from automated cold email starts to get lower and lower and lower. And we've consistently seen that across clients too. So as conversion rates get low, you can't just have 30 salespeople having the same problem. It's just too costly. It's better to, instead of 30 sales reps, let's say for example, you might have 10 or 15 that are only doing the highest converting and also most prioritized activities to an account. But anything else that's not probable to have a high conversion, you need a robot to do it. And usually the robots are a lot cheaper to do. So I think people have done this using Clay as a workflow tool. And then Clay is, because it has so many things you can integrate with, you can use OpenAI, you can use data sources, you can do a lot of stuff and automate a lot of things that should not be wasted on the precious human hour we have of a sales development representative or an account executive. Like that's really, really expensive time that we want to make sure is being used for expensive activities. So I think that, generally speaking, if I had to define it, that's really it. Now that conversion has gone so low in outbound, but we still need outbound, obviously, to pay the bills and make sure families are happy. We need to overcome that in a way that's more efficient and more cost effective, essentially.
Got it. So one of the things I've found talking with GTM engineers and folks who are kind of in this space, right, is like you can't avoid talking about tools, right? You just mentioned Limblist, you mentioned Clay, right? Those types of things. So just given our audience here who doesn't have their head, deep in this stuff, maybe just quickly, like you mentioned those two tools. Give us a high level view of like what those do, what problems are those solving, and then we'll kind of jump back into the role itself. But I just want to make sure, that we're giving people all the context they need.
Yeah. Well, to dive in what I was saying before, like Lemlist, they're actually one of the best currently. I think one of the best multi-channel sales engagement tools, meaning like kind of like an Outreach.io or a Sales Loft, like. And they do that really well today, but they originally got popular because they were pretty much the only tool in the market that you can do images with. So you can send an image and you can put someone, like I had one, for example, we had a picture of me I think I was like sipping coffee or something, and then on my fridge I had like the person's name. I was like, "Hey man, I was thinking of you today." I just like, and it wasn't that funny, or it wasn't that good, but it was so funny. I got a lot of responses from it, and we booked meetings. So like
Yeah.
that was kind of the original. Like, whoa, people are getting, they call it growth hacking. I think really that's what it was called 5 years ago. But yeah, but Clay is now a very important player. If you guys have probably heard of it at some level, maybe in GTM news or whatever. But Clay is a nice tool because it basically is just saying like, look guys, this is a spreadsheet and you can put in whatever data you want. You can take in data from, like, let's say you guys are using maybe a lead database tool, ZoomInfo, Apollo, whatever it is. That's great, but we need to do something with that data. Remember, our conversion rates are low. Like, if we can't just take a list, not validate it, and then just send 10,000 emails, like, it's not going to go well. We have to stand out. So to stand out, we're going to need to qualify these accounts. We're going to need to probably make sure we have the right contact information. Like, are these valid emails? Are these bad phone numbers? We then might want to take it a step further and look for other information that we otherwise would look for. Like, let's say, for example, I posted today, if you have a company that with software that helps people get more reviews for their e-commerce business, right? Well, what I might want to know for the prospect is, hey, do you have any products on your website that don't have any reviews or they have outdated reviews? Well, with Clay, I can use basically an OpenAI plugin in Clay, and I can just scrape their website automatically to find that information. And then I can reach out to them. So I'm adding personalization in too. So everything you usually would need to do to write a really good outbound message, email, whatever it is, you can just do that with Clay now using kind of the stuff they give you. It's a little bit of like a Swiss Army knife. Like you can do 100,000 things with it. That's why it's really versatile. I think the problem with Clay, and I think they understand this too, is it is kind of a huge learning curve. You have to be very creative to think of how you're going to use the Swiss Army knife. But as far as like, if you have an idea though, for like some sort of outbound motion, you can probably do it in Clay, like completely automated. And that's why they're very popular, and they're usually the engine most GTM engineering guys they're going to start with, because you can solve 80% of problems really, like kind of in Clay inherently.
Cool. I appreciate the background there. So, you've mentioned something that I think is probably kind of a common theme that I hear when I talk to CROs who are thinking about this area, right? It's this sense of like, okay, our conversion rates have gone down. We've got to figure out what to do with outbound specifically, right? And so there's a lot of folks talking about, well, the solution to those conversion rates is to automate as much as possible and to send more email, right? And I not to mischaracterize it, but like I think that's one of the things that I hear from a lot of sales leaders is like the kind of spam cannon idea of like, oh, okay, well, we're just going to send more and more and more. Isn't that ultimately just kind of making the problem worse? So I'm curious, when you think about the role of the GTM engineer as it relates to outbound, and as you look at across all the channels that might be involved in outbound, whether it's LinkedIn or phone or whatever those might be, what do you see as the role of the GTM engineer to orchestrate across those channels or to drive maybe not just volume, but efficiency? How do you think about that?
Yeah. So you're saying kind of like where does GTM like kind of sit, GTM engineering?
Yeah, well, I think for me, one of the things that I hear is kind of pushback to a lot of GTM engineering, right? Or not. I think it's a mischaracterization of the concept, because the concept is much more sophisticated than this. But I think where a lot of people hear that term, they start thinking like, okay, mass email, right?
Oh yeah,
And so I think what I'm wondering is, how would you think about, like, if you're thinking like, hey, let me explain to a VP of sales like how GTM engineering enables, not just more volume, more email, but more effective outreach. How would you talk about that?
Yeah, I think the funny thing is that you don't need Clay or any fancy GTM engineering skills to spam cannon. You can go get a Smart Lead account today. You can get a bunch of mailboxes from a vendor to stack it up, and then you can put an automated email that has no personalization, like in a ZoomInfo list like that. So I think, you can always spam cannon, of course. I think, though, yes, you can obviously do things. You could do it more efficiently. You could obviously scale it more. So yes, you can use Clay to do 100,000 emails a month, right? We have clients that do over 100,000 emails a month, like cold email. Like, there's some high volume senders out there, and sometimes you have the data to do it. You can do it, great. But no, I think for GTM engineering, really, it's just trying to make, like, I think number one, the data, and then number two, the strategy for the actual whatever motion you're doing more efficient without a human being involved. I think that's how I could break it down. So like, I think, for example, like we had this client, for example, they were doing like maybe 50,000 emails a month before they came to us. They're kind of high volume, but the guy there, he was a growth marketer and he was using Clay, and he was really smart because he would do a bunch of really cool plays. Like someone was just hired at a company, so he would say, "Hey, I saw you're just hired. I'm sure you're trying to shake things up. I know you guys are currently using X tool. We actually have a Y tool and it uses AI instead. Like, what do you think?" Right? So he would use these triggers and it would convert really well. You'd get like a 5% reply rate. And for example, his problem was cold email deliverability. But he already nailed the messaging down, and he already got a high quality set at a kind of a lower volume using some of these techniques, like making the data really good, getting the right triggers. This is all GTM engineering stuff. So then when he finally came to us, and then we actually just gave him a really good setup to send more emails, it just scaled almost linearly, funny enough. Like, so his 4 to 5% reply rate on his cold campaigns pretty much stayed the same even at a higher volume because he already got what was working like really well. And he didn't need any reps to do it. In fact, his setup was he would essentially send all these emails through our servers, like these awesome campaigns, and he would just send it round robin to the reps. He had 3 SDRs inbound that would just be like basically taking these discovery calls. Mm-hmm. So they don't even need to have an SDR doing the outbound with their setup. They were doing so much email. So I think what it does in those cases is like it really makes you not need to waste, like I said, like human capital on some of these things that we know aren't as high conversion. And this is all dependent on your sales process. Their ACV was probably like 5 to 7K per year. You know, they had maybe a total of 5 to 6 reps in their team total. So they needed a little more volume. Their TAM was pretty big, and they couldn't necessarily have an SDR sitting there doing a personalized message every day, you know, for like 5 to 9K ACV. So instead, they were like, well, let's just get more volume out there. Let's be smart with how we're approaching these people. So these are personalized emails, you know, we said that volume. And then when they reply, we'll have so many replies coming in, we'll just round robin them to the rep. And then now that we know they're actually like, they've responded, they're kind of like, they have some intent here talking to us. Now we take the human capital and book the meeting or take the discovery meeting essentially. So that's what I've seen. It's just driving efficiency. I mean, for me, in my context, it's the sales motion, but I've seen people do this in like CRMs, like with the customer success motion or like other things kind of like that. They're just making the data better and like the strategy better because they're automating more.
So, and I think this brings me to another question here, which is, why do you think this role is different from, you know, a role in RevOps or something like that, right? Or different from, you know, maybe an SDR who's just really ambitious about trying to automate things? Like, what sets this apart and makes this unique from roles that have historically existed in go-to-market teams?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of overlap with like RevOps, sales ops, because, you know, naturally they're just trying to get their team enabled from like the software side or from the data side. Like I think there definitely is some overlap there. And honestly, if you're watching or reading this, like you might be this, like being in RevOps, you might be the one that implements some of these specific things. But I think that the GTM engineer role in itself, it just is also probably going to be a little more creative than like RevOps. I think if I hire someone, I think maybe sales ops is a better way to say, like if I hire someone for a sales ops role for a SDR team, I'm expecting them to really work on the CRM hygiene, the data to be really good for the reporting, making sure the softwares are talking to each other properly, and then probably making it a little more efficient moving through, like if they're talking to different tools. That would be like an expectation. GTM engineering, though, I might have them be kind of like in between marketing and sales. Like they're actually like they're creating campaigns. They're like sales ops doesn't always need to be that creative. Sometimes it really is just like black and white. It's like just technology is talking, right? But GTM engineering it's using proper tools, like the ones that are fast and easy to use and automating, but at the same time, it's also being creative. So like, I think the best example from a sales context is it's kind of like that client I told you about. Like they have a marketing team. They're a startup, but they had a marketing team that would do like webinars, ads, right? We're not necessarily touching that as much in a sales context. That's happening over there for marketing. However, the sales team needs to book discovery calls over here. They need to do some outbound, and they need to like get accounts, you know, and cold. So the problem is there's a bridge there because marketing is going to send an opt-in lead. Maybe we have an inbound, great, but sometimes they're not always qualified. And they don't really want to touch outbound because that's not really marketing. They're probably working in HubSpot or Marketo, whatever it is. So like it's not, a lot of them just kind of close that off altogether. And then sales doesn't really want to do a lot of the drumming up. They think marketing's doing that, so they do cold outbound. But then the tools they use or the manual effort they do is not efficient because it's 2025. The conversion rates, right? So you're stuck in this hard part where sales is being like, they're not getting much meetings out of their cold, and marketing's not really helping them at all because they think it's a different category. So GTM engineering, I think, comes in the middle. Like my friend there, he was kind of like their head of growth, and he worked with marketing sometimes, but generally speaking, he was just like, man, this cold email campaign would work really well. Why don't we just do it when someone gets hired as a CFO and we're selling accounting software? Well, when they get hired, if it's within the last 3 months, they're probably looking to shake things up a bit. I'll make this copy for it and I'll send 100,000 of them. And then the replies will be triaged to sales team. So then the sales reps are getting inbound. So he's using Clay. He's probably going to use maybe some APIs, or he's going to connect maybe a couple tools to Clay in other softwares. And he's going to know a little bit about the sales reps' daily workflow. Like if they're in outreach, for example, maybe it's like, I need to create a task in outreach. That's the most efficient way for them to like handle this lead. We need to make sure the data is up to date so we can report on it. So like there's still in the sales ops stuff, but he's also likely generating campaigns. I think that's maybe the main difference between that and like a sales and rev ops focus.
So if you were advising a CRO, and let's say this is a CRO that really is looking across demand generation all the way to customer success, right?
Mm-hmm.
And probably has a partner in RevOps that is, doing true RevOps, like all the way from kind of marketing ops through to, CS ops. Where would you put a GTM engineering role or group? How do you think they should report into the business?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, generally speaking, I think the CRO is overlooking all of this usually, like a chief revenue officer. And in your buckets of marketing, sales, and customer success, I think GTM engineering does go in all three for sure. However, I think the main two use cases is both marketing and sales. It's likely going to be somewhere in between those two. So it's almost this weird like in between department where like marketing, sales, and CS. GTM engineering is kind of like enabling all three of them, and then like or CRO might be like looking at like everything above, right? So I think you can place it differently depending on your organization. Like I don't know, like what the hierarchy is going to be the same, but I do think that the main use case is like number one, marketing, like the data. Like you can, the stuff you can do with Clay, you can make like landing pages too. There's crazy stuff on the marketing side to make sure your marketing data is really good. You got personalization, enrichments. Like it definitely needs to belong in that case to support marketing. Or if they have, like, for example, they have marketing campaigns, they have an opt-in lead. Well, guess what? What's that lead all about? Do they work at a company? Do they have an email? Like this is really important information. And then on the sales side, helping on the technical side, make sure everyone's like enabled. Like, are we sending cold emails? Are we doing deliverability? All the stuff we need for that. And we also need to make campaigns for them. So you kind of start to get into the sales side now. And then I think on the customer success side, this gets a lot more like the CRM hygiene. Tools like Clay can really help you get like super deep with the data you have on like particular accounts, which is also really helpful. It could be helpful in customer success. And also just like even when you just first onboard a customer, like this is just like if you have like, or like people might change jobs, for example, right? Well, that might really affect customer success if you're talking to John all day and all of a sudden he leaves. Like you might want to know that like someone else joined the role and that guy left, and that they might be a churn risk now because, hey, we have a month-to-month agreement with these guys. And to be honest, like Steve loved us, but this new Greg guy, I don't know if he's going to like us as much. We should really focus on that. So it's really like keeping the data up to date and also like making sure you have the full context of like every account. I think that can be applied to all three of them. But I do think the money makers, at least, or where if I had a budget for them, right, like the biggest uplift you can get from budgeting for GTM engineering is definitely somewhere between like the marketing and sales approach.
Got it. Well, let's talk about the budgeting side, another thing that's near and dear to the hearts of sales leaders. How should they think about budgeting for a GTM engineer role? And I think that kind of dovetails into maybe a related question, which is, what kind of orgs should have a GTM engineer that's a full-time employee or multiple GTM engineers, I suppose, versus who should maybe consider outsourcing it versus maybe who shouldn't even be considering it at all? So maybe let's just start there. Like, what are the prerequisites for having somebody in this role on your team who could be successful? And then how would you think about having that person be an FTE versus somebody that you outsource to?
Yeah, this is a good point. So, I actually think I'm a huge believer that the early young SDRs, I'm 28, obviously I'm not 50, but like young, like, okay, just got out of college. They're junior SDRs. There's naturally going to be a couple of them probably that are like a little less, oh my gosh, I really want to pick the phone up and cold call, but they know enough about sales. Like maybe they've been trained, maybe they've actually done the job for a year or two, but they just might be better equipped to do GTM engineering because they're more creative. They might want to use tools more, like that kind of thing. And I would say that characterizes myself. Like now, I own my own business, obviously, but naturally speaking, I much love the marketing side, like making campaigns, using the actual softwares. I love using software, right? I like that way more than being on a sales call with someone. It's just like natural. That's just me, right? So like if I started as an SDR at a company and I was looking to be like, let's say promoted or shifting careers, that's a crazy easy lift because someone who already knows your product, they already are a sales development rep. Going to GTM engineering, it's still pretty adjacent. But now it might, it could be like maybe similar pay depending on how you do it. But the good news is they can kind of get into their zone of genius. So I think that's an easy lift without having to outsource it or anything like that. They do need to learn stuff, obviously. Like that, I think like honestly, Clay's University, that's a pretty good place to start. Eric Nowoslavsky too, he has a nice YouTube channel like using Clay and stuff. He has a free course. Like I think that'd be a great place to start for any like SDR who's already like kind of thinking about this stuff to just kind of get it going. And then you just want to cement it a little more. Like, what are your roles going to be? Like, are you doing campaigns? If so, like, why is it going to be better? So I think that could be, you have to cement it. But that's an easy lift. I think for hiring though, yeah, number one, I think you need to do this if you have a big sales team, not big, like let's say you have a team like maybe like more than 10 people. Like there's enough, like you have one manager, two managers at least, and there's at least 1 to 2 bottlenecks happening on a monthly basis. Have like for example, I have a company that they're potentially going to sign on with us, and their problem right now is that they have I think like maybe 13, 14 reps, and they have phone issues, connect rates, and they have email issues. So the phone issue, we don't do a ton with that. We have a buddy helping them with that, and their connect rate was like 4%, right? So you got 13 reps, super low connect rate. They're barely getting good phone data anyway. And then when they finally do these multi-channel sequences with phone and whatever, not only they're not picking the phone up, but then their emails go to spam too. So like by the end of the day, like these guys, they're getting like 30, 40 conversations a week, maybe across the whole team because the conversion is so bad. So on the phone side, for example, GTM engineering, like we can't do 5% connect rates. That's not going to work, right? So like, for example, like Titan X, love those guys. Titan X, they're a solution, for example, that makes your connect rates be 25%. It's pretty slick, right? Now, a GTM engineer would spot this problem, and then, for example, they would say, we need Titan X. And then once we get Titan X, I'll integrate it with Outreach and all that stuff, make sure, and we might not need 15 reps. But if we don't fire anyone and we only have 15 reps, we're going to get way more out of them. So we're either going to increase pipeline with the same reps, or if you're trying to budget like hiring wise, we don't need maybe 2 or 3 of them now because we're getting way more output. So it depends on if you're in like a cutting phase or if you're just trying to get more from what you have. But that's how I think of it. And then like for us on the email side, right? 3-month deliverability, they're probably getting like 0.75% reply rate across the whole team. Just setting from our servers, they might get 2.5 to 3%. That's a massive lift for their current thing, right? So we're obviously a service, but a proper GTM engineer would audit what's going on and know like we're trying to get more from what we already have. That's the biggest thing. So I would budget for it almost like it's a super SDR. If you're thinking, so it's either an SDR comes in and they're interested and you hire them within, or if you hire a full-time person, you should say this person should help me get the output of 2 to 3 reps in some way. So either they're going to do some work and that work is going to give us more pipeline, or they themselves will generate like their own pipeline, and it's going to be more than one guy would. That's how I think of it. And I think when you think of it that way, that like this company, for example, like they think of it like, I don't want to hire 2 more BDRs. I want you guys to help us find out where the holes are and then solve them so we can get 1 to 2 BDRs worth of pipeline today. That's and all of it's probably for the cost of like just about maybe 1 BDR, right? Per year when you take in all the OTE. So that's the way I would think about budgeting it, and I would just kind of move around hiring budget for either new hires or like the current budget you guys have, and just move that around to try to can we find a super SDR that has can do 2 to 3x of one person, and then I'll budget accordingly to that essentially.
So it's interesting that you bring up the 2 to 3x SDR, because I think one question that I have, I wrote a piece not too long ago that got a lot of traction about the 10x sales rep, whether or not that was an actual possibility, right? I'm still a little skeptical, but I think there's maybe a path towards that. Do you think that there's, when you're thinking about projecting this into the future, do you think that this GTM engineer role becomes like what the SDR of the future is, or do you think that it's a separate role in and of itself on a sales org? Because I think this idea of an SDR that's capable of producing the pipeline of 2 to 3 of like, previous unautomated SDRs is an interesting concept. So do you see those melding together? Or do you think they stay as separate roles?
I think I think the more maybe like 5, 10 years from now, the more transactional businesses that sell maybe something that's just a little more simple, like maybe it's less than 5K ACV, they could do the sales process is pretty short, and again, you don't need to have a lot of hands-on help getting a meeting on the calendar. This could potentially be that, because I think a lot of those businesses also, they don't usually have big SDR teams either. Like that's kind of the point. Like they're not, maybe they have one or two, but they're very slow to, like, they're gonna have 15 reps. They're gonna have more AEs before they have SDRs. I think the teams that you see maybe have an actual SDR team. That I don't know what would necessarily. I think it's gonna get more efficient. I don't think it would replace, though, because, like, for example, if you're selling like to enterprise or even like mid market, you might have 5 to 10 SDRs on your team, and then, like, let's say 6, 7 AEs. The reason why you have 5 or 10 SDRs is because there's a lot of work to do. Like, it's like you have to be able to, as a human, know kind of what to do. You can do automated stuff all you want, but at the end of the day, like, someone has to own going after 50 accounts and breaking in to get something started in the sales process. So I think the complicated deals, I wouldn't do that. And I also think it's not responsible. Like, if you screw something up that bad, you might, like, miss an account. But the transactional ones, though, yeah, I think I've already kind of seen this too. Like, even like, for example, we have this, they're a client of ours, but we also have been using them recently, which has been fun. This tool called Peel, and Peel is cool because it's kind of like think of it, it's like a survey tool. Like, don't overcomplicate in your head. It's a survey tool, but it's an AI voice agent, and you can use it in cold outreach. And the thing is, you can book a demo off of this agent, meaning you can say, hey, Joe, here's what we're thinking for your company, whatever it is your outbound is. You send this link, they go through the survey, this person fills out all their discovery call data, essentially, that, like, what are your problems, whatever it is. You can do this with gift card. There's all kinds of ways you can run it, but you get the data for the discovery call on this Peel, and then you could book the demo right off this tool, for example, right? So, like, we're running this play, and, like, for example, this play, you could just book a demo and already have the discovery call done. We can just do a demo on this call, and, like, that's it. So I'm already seeing tools, like, when you're mixing in a couple different tools, replacing some of this process, this kind of old clunky sales process. So at the more transactional level. So I think that there definitely could be, like, a GTM engineer that just kind of is SDRs for, like, the more transactional businesses in, like, 5 to 10 years. But I don't think it's going to really replace the enterprise mid-market stuff. I think you're always going to need something. Or even at the minimum, you need someone looking at the whole system also, just to make sure the system, like, there's always going to be something going on there where a human needs to kind of do it.
Because one of the things I'm kind of curious about, I think, is that this role, the GTM engineer role, as it's kind of currently viewed, is a lot of the things that you're talking about, right? Like building these campaigns, doing these types of things. But there's another sort of emerging, I think, automation play that's happening internally that, may kind of coincide with more agents internally, those types of things, kind of a more agentic view of, like, how do I take a rep who's working with a, Fortune 500 accounts or something like that, and make sure that they always have the information, the signals, the context they need to do the right kind of outreach at the right time. Some of that may take the form, I think, of, like, maybe actual AI agents that are collecting data and synthesizing it, maybe doing something with it. Some of it may just be research and context. But I'm kind of curious, like, do you think there's a role, and if so, for the GTM engineer to provide that kind of support to, maybe a BDR that is in that more, like, mid-market or enterprise role, or a rep that's in that more mid-market and enterprise role, less about campaigns and more about maybe context that's needed to be successful in a sales process or with heavily customized, personalized outreach? How do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I do think that you absolutely can and should. I think that instead of trying to have the GTM engineer replace people or get more output out of the same rep, they are doing that anyway. But, like, at that level, though, yeah, getting one of the tools, like I said, using Clay, for example, using Clay to do something like that, where you're not necessarily doing outbound all the time, but you might just do research or personalization. That's one of the two big uses of Clay. This is great for enriching the CRM, getting in the output. And this is an example. I did a proposal last month for this company, and it basically went like this. We would put their whole TAM in Clay as much as we could. We would personalize research, do all the stuff in basically one table, and their intent data they're getting from 6 Sense, and like that would come in. But then it's not just as it was. We would actually enrich it. So we're getting them as much research and whatever possible. So then what happens is every week, 50 to 100 accounts, depending on territory, are assigned to each rep. And the rep just opens up Outreach.io. They have 15 tasks. And it says, go reach out to Jim. And you click on Jim or the company, whatever. And it's got the entire account's research, personalization, whatever. They can check a couple of things. And then they can enroll in their sequence. And now they're not sending 400 emails a day out of their personal, outreach account. They're sending 25. And they're all the best accounts. So I think that GTM engineers definitely should be also supporting the efficiency of a sales team. I think that's a huge uplift. Whether you're doing this could be using Clay for data. You could also do this in other ways, like we do email deliverability. That's a huge issue. A lot of companies they just send cold emails all day, and these reps it's not their job to be in IT. They just want to send emails. So you need to enable them, and that might be enabling them with better email inboxes or infrastructure, right? So I think that generally speaking, the GTM engineer role, or engineers if you have multiple, they should just be obsessing over how do I make this as easy and as efficient for my sales team to execute on everything every second of the day. That's I focus on the SDR context a lot just because of what I do, but this is also in the AEs too. Like what are the tools we can use for the sales process? Are we tools like Fluent or maybe you're using Gong? Can we get insights on a deal really quickly? And if we have that, can we connect these tools together to get real-time data outside of these tools to make sure we have everything we have for this deal so we can properly forecast? So no matter where you're on the sales process, I think that needs to be obsession. And I think that's why people hire people like us and GTM engineers, because they're not. It's these guys, usually it's an SDR manager or a sales manager. They're just guys, I am just I have so much going on. I'm managing 14 reps. I have 3 projects that my CEO wants me to look into. I trialed 2 demos today with I don't have time to be obsessing over the most efficient workflow for my rep. All I know is they have a quota and I'm trying to get them to hit it. And all they're doing is complaining to me saying they're manually copying and pasting stuff in Salesforce for 2 hours a day, right? But they know the problem, but there just isn't any bandwidth. And that's where again, when I see that, when I audit that, I get so excited because that's what I obsess over, right? It's when I see that from my perspective, I'm like, guys, look at this. Look at this hole we can plug, right? Or look at this. We can do this over here. So I think as long as you have that attitude, you'll end up applying it to whether you're replacing SDR, whether you're giving context with personalization, whether you're helping AEs, or even customer success, for CRM hygiene. I think that kind of attitude will naturally just start to grow across multiple departments, essentially.
Well, I think that's a really good place to kind of wrap up here. So I really appreciate the time and the perspective on the future. I want to do one quick kind of lightning round though, right here at the end, which is
bring the thunder.
You've mentioned a lot of tech stack, different kinds of applications, that sort of thing. Real quickly, 2 questions on that because I do think it's interesting. Number one, what do you think the core GTM engineering tech stack is right now? I can guess some of the constituents, but that's number one. And then number 2 is, what do you see emerging out there? So on the tech stack front, we'll start from that, or we'll do that real quick as a lightning round here at the end.
Yeah, I think that from I'd say from a data standpoint, I could probably confidently say these 2. Clay.com, because you can just do so much with workflows and stuff, and you can essentially get data from them anyway. They scrape LinkedIn, so that it can kind of be your out-of-the-box tool anyway. And I would also say Ocean.io. I like them a lot because I actually think they're probably the most precise lead database type tools, because they're kind of like what Apollo was 5 years ago. Everyone's getting excited about Apollo. And they're like a Zoom Info alternative. They're not too expensive, and the core thing with Ocean is that you can do a lookalike search. So if you have your best customer, you might you provide a ton of value. They pay you a lot. We love them, right? You can put the website of that customer in, and Ocean has a bunch of micro tags in it. So it knows are they an e-commerce business? Are they a computer software business? And it can do a lookalike based on tags to find companies that are like that company. And they can also do the same thing at the people level too. You can find, hey, this growth marketer, he loved working with us. Let's find other growth marketers at other companies. So that number one is enough to use Ocean. They also just have much better industry filters. It's not just information and technology. You guys probably see on Zoom Info, right? They have sub industries. You can get really granular. So I like them, mixing them in with Clay on the data side. And then I think if you're doing cold email, maybe specifically, in my opinion, I don't think we should be using Outreach.io or SalesLoft or anything more than 30 emails a day per rep. Don't do it. You're going to destroy your email. So what I would do is I would use a Smart Lead or Instantly. Because that way you're not paying per mailbox. Number one, you could do higher volume, and you can basically if you do it properly, you can integrate it in a way with SalesLoft and in Outreach and even Salesforce. You can put something in the middle where your reps aren't really handling that anymore. So that way, like emails are coming out, and really it becomes an inbound lead for them when someone responds. That way and then your GTM engineer kind of handles the email stuff. So those are probably my 4 big players. And then emerging, I think full enrich. I like them a lot for getting enriched data. They actually basically, you might have heard like waterfall enrichment. People do like, a bunch of tools until like you find an email. So full enrich just does like, it kind of does that for you all in one shot. Like they already have integrations with like everyone. So when you put someone's email in or data in, it'll try like 14 vendors. And then basically if you didn't get an email back from them, like no one's going to get it. Like that's what I like about it. It just keeps it simple. So they're good for emails and phone numbers. Like they're really good. And then Peel. Yeah. I like Peel is, I've only started using them in the last month. So it's still kind of new. Peel is really emerging because I think the outbound use case, they're really making outbound like a lot more approachable. So reply rates are going up, but also they're getting rid of the discovery call process, because when someone actually fills out one of these like survey agents, the data I get like from someone filling that out, it's I can't even explain like how good it is, because they were a cold lead 3 seconds ago. And if they get through this agent, because I have an incentive, like whether it's a gift card or whether it's like access to a report, ways I can do it. If they fill that out, I know exactly what problems are going on at their company from someone who's on the ground of that company, meaning I can now take that report and share it with an executive and say, guys, look, I just talked to 3 people from your team. Like they're not hitting their quota and the reply rates are 0.5%, but yet at the same time, sales enablement isn't helping them. This is happening. Do you want us to help you? Like that's a crazy play that I don't think was really possible a few years ago. So I think they're up and coming, but I think like you should definitely check them out. That's getpeel.ai, I believe is their full domain. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for the time, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Anytime.
All right.
I'll be back on if you need me.
All right.